Welcome to Autism Canada's podcast, Sharing the Spectrum, an engaging series of discussions about relevant topics including parenting, relationships, employment, education, nutrition, and so much more. We look forward to introducing you to people from our ASD community and sharing their perspectives on life and autism. Autism Canada is the only Canadian autism organization with a national perspective on the issues currently facing those living in Canada with ASD, their families, and other stakeholders. Our mission as an organization is to advocate for and support people in Canada living with autism and their families. And our vision is that people on the autism spectrum live full, healthy, and happy lives. For more information about Autism Canada, please visit us at www.autismcanada.org. And now, please enjoy this episode of Sharing the Spectrum.
Hi, and welcome to Autism Canada's very first podcast. My name is Kelly Bron Johnson, and I'm one of the board directors here at Autism Canada. I am a late diagnosed autistic female, so that is actually a very, very common thing. A lot of the times in females, it gets a diagnosis gets missed. And so I didn't get diagnosed until adulthood after my son was diagnosed with autism. So I bring these very interesting perspectives to the board and to all the staff at Autism Canada as being a parent of a person on the spectrum and as being an autistic person myself. Now, Autism Canada has been doing its work as a nonprofit organization for over 40 years. And this is an amazing feat. I think we should have a giant birthday cake when we get to 45. We're very close. Our mission is to help autistic people and their families lead full, happy, healthy lives. That sounds ambitious, doesn't it? But it's not impossible, and we can do this work with your help, and I'll give you some tips a bit later. Our slogan at Autism Canada is to see the spectrum differently. And this is basically what we do every single day with all our social media posts, all the information that we put out there. We are trying to encourage people to see the spectrum differently. And this is why we encourage any autistic person who wants to submit their stories, their poems, their music, their great works, their conversations with local government officials, whatever they are doing in their daily lives, to show people that that's the face of autism across Canada. And we're all very different. We're all unique, but we all have amazing talents and strengths that we can offer the world. One of the other great things that Autism Canada does is we put on the Awesome Conference, which is an annual conference. And in the past, we've met in person, but last November, we decided to take it virtual. And this has gained amazing feedback. We're very happy that it was quite successful because it allowed people all across Canada to participate and to get content that they wouldn't normally, especially if they live in a remote area or they're not able to travel. This bringing it into your rooms, into your living rooms, virtually has just expanded our reach. And we're very, very happy that we were able to do that. And none of this work that we do would be possible without the generous donations by our sponsors and our private donors. We're very, very pleased. And we want to keep providing these kind of amazing services and supports to you. And so we really, really appreciate that. I'd like to say thank you. Now, one thing that has come up recently, because I think by the time this podcast gets out, it will be April. And one momentous day, I guess, that came up in the autism community was World Autism Awareness Day. So if you don't know, that was a day that was designated by United Nations back in 2007 to be celebrated on April 2nd each year worldwide. Now, me and a lot of different autistic self-advocates, or I and a lot of autistic self-advocates like to say World Autism Awareness and Acceptance Day. So we add an extra A in there. And why do we add the acceptance? That's because Like I said, a lot has changed since 2007. I believe now society is becoming much, much more aware. It's still not perfect. There's still a lot we can do. But with this awareness, we can now, I think, move forward to acceptance. And acceptance is so important because that really changes an autistic person's daily life. We need to appreciate our wonderful diversity, our talents, our strengths. And yes, there are challenges, but when we see the spectrum as this wonderful, diverse spectrum of people, and we accept these differences in each other, I think this leads to a greater way that we can have autistic people living healthy, happy lives. And that's why I say when adding in the acceptance into World Autism Awareness Day, this really does impact our daily lives when we go out and we know that we can be safe. We can go out and know that even if we are flapping or doing something a bit differently or what might look a little weird, that people understand that we're not dangerous. They can instantly recognize it as something that's just an autistic person being autistic. And they can best understand as well how to intervene if they need to. If, let's say, we're having a bit of a panic attack in a grocery store, how to best approach somebody and how to support them through it. So having acceptance in the world is really something that makes a huge difference in our lives. And I'd say, in addition to awareness and acceptance, another A word is advocacy. And so when we teach autistic people how to best advocate for themselves, that is a lifelong skill that will stay with them and is super, super important. You need to advocate for yourself on a daily basis for your needs in the workplace, at school. And I know that as a parent, a lot of parents are really scared that once they're gone and they're not able to advocate for their child anymore, that their child is not going to be able to do it. And so we want to support you through that and building these advocacy skills. Start it when they're young. And luckily, at the same time, even if you didn't start it when they're young, the wonderful thing about autism is that it is a developmental disability, which means that our timeline is a little bit different, but it doesn't mean it's impossible for us to learn things. And, contrary to when people say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, well, I can tell you, a lot of us autistics don't really mature until we're in our late 20s or 30s. And for sure, we can continue to learn late into our lifetime. Even when we're seniors, we will continue to learn and to adapt. And so don't be scared to start helping them learn to advocate for themselves. And I don't think there's not an age that's too young, but there's also not an age that's too old. So give it a go. And I think, we're here to support you in that and stay positive. Okay, now I'd like to take a minute to introduce my son, Ronan, who's autistic. Ronan, how old are you?
10.
And when did you find out you were autistic?
I forgot.
You forgot?
Yeah.
So has it just always been that way?
What do you mean?
Well, I guess you don't have a moment of me telling you, I guess, right? Is that what you're saying? You don't have a memory of me telling you? You just have always kind of known that's how you were.
I just forgot when you told me, and I just known from that point.
Yeah.
I just forgot that you told me, and I've known from that point.
Well, I think maybe that's because we've had a series of small discussions ever since you were very, very small. When you got your diagnosis, we've always used the words and spoken to you openly about it. So I guess that's, rather than having a moment of being told, you've just had a lot of little moments when we've explained it to you over time. Maybe. Does that make sense?
I think.
So can you share your perspective a little bit about what it's like being autistic?
Good.
So what are some of the things that make it good?
I don't know.
Is there anything that makes it bad?
I don't know.
So What kind of things do you find super easy to do?
History?
Ah, you like history. So is it because you can memorize the dates and things? What makes it interesting? What's so interesting about history?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm just attracted to it.
Mm-hmm. What else? How about, do you like mechanics? Do you like how
Oh, yeah.
things work?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And so when you're at school, what do you find hard? Is there anything that you find really difficult at school?
SFA?
Oh yeah. So what's SFA? What's that?
It's
For people who don't know.
it's like literature and books things.
Mm. But you can read really, really, really well.
It's the writing part.
Ah, I know you don't like handwriting. Yeah. So, when you have problems with handwriting, is it because your brain moves a little faster than your hand thinks, than your hand moves?
Kind of. I think it's mainly because of the questions.
So it takes time for you to process and think about the questions and the answers, maybe?
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely. Okay. So now we talked about the challenges and we talked about your strengths. So what is something you would like the world to know about autism? Because today is World Autism Awareness Day. And, well, not today. The day that this podcast is going to come out is in celebration of Autism Awareness Day. And so what would you like everyone to know about autism?
Don't know.
So let's say if you could, if you were telling somebody about autism and they had no clue, like as if you were an alien and they showed up and they didn't know anything about autism, what would you tell them? Well, how would you explain it to them?
I think it's a kind of brain disability like thing. I don't know what's the other word for it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it kind of affects your brain a bit from when you're born.
And what do you have in common with other autistic people?
I think sometimes there's definitely speech impediments.
That can happen, for sure. There can be speech impediments. There can be auditory processing. So it means that what you hear, it takes you a little bit more time to think and process it. I know I have that problem.
What?
I have that problem. I have the problem of auditory processing. It takes me a bit more time to think and process. And if somebody gives me a bunch of directions, I need to write them down because I'm not going to remember them.
Yeah, definitely. Remember when I just asked you that question?
Exactly. You see, yeah, and that's it. You see that shows one of the kind of ways that you've compensated because you're able to ask for clarification, which is a really super important skill, and that buys you some time to be able to then think and respond.
Okay.
So to me, that's an example of how you advocate for yourself and your needs. And I think you do it so seamlessly. And I'm super proud of you for that.
Yeah.
So do you want to maybe comment about what it's like having an autistic mom? Do you think that's good or bad?
Not sure. Maybe good.
Well, I guess you're saying that because you're sitting right next to me.
Okay.
Do you believe that I understand your brain and your perspective a bit?
Definitely.
Okay, that's good. That's good. That helps.
What the heck?
Okay, well, is that good for you? Is there anything you want to add?
I don't know.
You don't know? Okay, that's fine. Well, thank you so much for being a guest on our Autism Canada podcast.
Yes, it's been 7 minutes apparently.
It's been 7 minutes.
According to this thing.
Okay,
It's not
thank you.
like 6 minutes and a half.
Excellent.
Okay, bye.
Thank you. Well, I hope you found that to be a entertaining and refreshing perspective of a young autistic person. I hope that it shows a bit of his insight and his skills for not only asking for accommodations in daily life, but also his developing self-advocacy skills. Since I wasn't diagnosed, I struggled horribly. It wasn't, en vogue in 1980s to diagnose a young girl with autism. It was almost unheard of to diagnose really anybody with autism unless they seemed to be extremely severely affected or extremely stereotypically affected. I don't think in my time that it was seen as something that even happened to girls. So I basically was forced to try to act and appear as normal as I possibly could. And I was seen as the weird child. I was seen as the quirky one. I thrived in school. I was actually much happier at school than I was at home. And I thrived off the structure and the routine. And when things were off routine, I remember crying. And it didn't necessarily take much. And I remember my parents noticing that I was different and just trying desperately to get me to not be different. There was a interesting mix because there were times when they were proud of me for not yielding to peer pressure and just kind of dancing to the beat of my own drum. But there were times when they were genuinely concerned and scared and didn't want me to be different. They didn't want me to stick out. So that led to a very confusing kind of childhood. And then when I got into university, well, actually even in CEGEP, I started to fall apart. I had to make my own school schedule and kind of motivate myself. And at the same time, it was liberating because I was no longer having to be defined by my marks. So in high school, my worth, or elementary and high school, I'd say my worth was in the fact that I was a very high achiever. And I was on the honor roll or the scholar roll pretty much consistently. And when I got to CEGEP, which is in Quebec, that's like our pre-university program, I when you turn 18, you no longer have to show your report cards to your parents anymore, and that became my business. And so I started to do things for myself. I started to take classes that I enjoyed and not just what people thought I should do. And I started to fail. And it was actually liberating. It sounds kind of backwards, but it was actually liberating to fail for the first time. And part of why I failed was also because I did not know how to study. I had kind of just breezed through school and never had to study, just kind of sat there in school and I'm a very visual learner. I kind of just learned by osmosis, and I had amazing memory. I still do, which is great. And so that's what got me through. And then in CEGEP and university, it doesn't quite work that way anymore. You have to really think for yourself and to come up with your own ideas and express them. And that's when, like I said, things start to really fall apart. That being said, I still managed to graduate from university. I did not graduate cum laude like I had hoped, but in a very funny story, I don't know if anybody's interested in this, I had a very, very funny story where I had calculated my GPA on my own before graduation, and I had done the calculation kind of wrong, and I thought I was cum laude. I really was convinced I was. And I think you need 3.6, if I remember correctly. In the end, realistically, I was 3.34 or something like that. Anyway, we were in line to graduate to get my diploma. I'm in line backstage, and they had the papers with your names, and then if you were actually cum laude, it would say your name plus cum laude. Mine didn't, and I was that there's a person that checks to make sure they're pronouncing your name properly, and I saw that. And she asked me, and I said, no, this must be a mistake. I'm cum laude. There has to be cum laude next to me. Like, I don't understand. There has to be a mistake. And they said, oh, okay, are you sure? Okay, we're not, all right. Anyway, they called my name, and they told the person who was announcing the names to add cum laude. And I just remember they call my name, and I start walking up, and she kind of looks over and she's kind of confused because her paper doesn't say that, but she was apparently told to say that. And, she says my name, and then she says cum laude, and then everybody's clapping. So I'm possibly the only person to ever graduate cum laude without actually being cum laude. Anywho, I say that too just because that could have been easily misinterpreted by neurotypicals, and that often happens where they say, oh, well, she was being manipulative or lying, and, that she just was trying to get something that she wanted and she's being manipulative. And that really wasn't the case. It was completely innocent. I really, truly believe that I was because of the way that I added up my score. And I got it wrong, but I truly believe that I was cum laude, and I wasn't trying to manipulate anybody. I wasn't trying to get something out of it. Like, I wasn't, it wasn't any sort of evil intentions. It really was innocent. And that's a really good example of how autistic people's actions can sometimes be misinterpreted as being manipulative or, malicious intent. And that's just a really good example of how much it wasn't. And bringing it back to acceptance, help understand that a lot of the times when autistic people do things and we're truly convinced that it's right, and that's just the way our neurology is. We're really not thinking about trying to hurt anyone. And so I hope if there's anything that people can understand about autistic people and moving forward to bringing about awareness about acceptance, is that a lot of the things that we do really, really are they're thought through on, I'm not going to say a superficial level, but in such because it's obviously it was extremely important to me at the time. But it really wasn't it certainly wasn't trying to hurt anyone else. It was really me. I felt like I was standing up for something that was truly what I believed. And so if there's any takeaway to that, is that sometimes our thinking can be very rigid and very passionate, but not necessarily in a mean way. And this, especially in the workplace, a lot of times people can misinterpret our actions or our words as being mean-spirited when we really, really did not consider it to be taken that way. And we certainly didn't even want to leave anybody with that feeling. So you can always ask for clarification if you're not sure about something that happened, and try to look through it a different lens. Try not to use your neurotypical glasses to judge an autistic person. We have to change the lenses on your glasses to kind of get an understanding. And if you try to approach it from the most innocent way, that the person was really not intending to harm, it will help a lot to bridge the gap in autistic and neurotypical communication. And I think it will lead to just a greater understanding and a deeper sense of connection between us. So I hope you enjoyed our very first episode. I know that there were going to be some amazing guests coming up, and I believe that some of the other board members are also going to be interviewed. So I hope that will give you a better understanding and insight into what Autism Canada is doing and the kind of people that are working for you to try to best support and advocate for you. And of course, we always welcome your feedback. We are, I'm not going to say always available, but I can tell you that I know that our family support representative receives over 200 calls a month. And again, it's because of the support of our sponsors and our donors that we are able to continue to provide that kind of on-the-ground immediate support for families and for individuals. And it's super important work that we do every single day, tirelessly almost, although we do get tired. But for all of us here at Autism Canada, I can tell you that this is our passion. We wouldn't do it if we didn't love it, and that's for sure. So I thank you for listening. And again, I'd like to thank our sponsors for making this happen.
Thank you for joining us today. Stay tuned for more episodes of Sharing the Spectrum, an Autism Canada podcast. The beautiful music you heard is from Bruce Petherick. Bruce is a neurodiverse musician and friend of Autism Canada, and you can check out more of his music on his website at www.brucepetherick.com. There is also a link on the podcast homepage. Our executive producer is Barbara Patton. Julie Perkis produced this week's episode. A thank you to Michael Rayner for the audio editing and setup. Additional thanks to the Autism Canada team, including Shannon Solinsky, Dominique Perron, Mariana Kurick, and Earl Solinsky. If you want to hear more podcasts or for more resources, don't forget to visit www.autismcanada.org.